Hey everybody, it is Saturday evening and we are going to take a trip around the world. I finally have something to talk about in my 29 miscellaneous here, and that is that I just did a bunch of tank maintenance on it. I did a fairly significant water change, probably at least a 25, maybe a 30% water change. I wiped down the front glass. I removed a bunch of the floating water sprite, removed a few dead fronds from the you can see I have Java fern up there at the top. And I removed a few dead fronds from that. And I did a filter change while I was in there. I did want to note, if we can still see it, I'm not sure how well it's coming out, but just under that piece of wood, you can kind of see its tail sticking out. That is my clown pleco, so we know that one's still alive. I was just looking at my Bolivian ram a minute ago. He's over here now. It's doing well and looking good, putting on weight, still looking colorful and everything. Very different story from the one I bought at the same time as this one. It's in my office tank upstairs and I'm having trouble with it. But this one looks fine, so I'm very happy about that. And that is all I've got new to report on this tank. I do still have this little skinny skirt tetra that's never really put on weight since the day I bought it. It still seems to be doing fine. It just looks like it's sort of a runt, or, you know, just sort of genetically deficient. I don't think it's really going to get much better than that. But it still seems to be healthy enough. It still feeds and swims around with all the rest of them. It's just not going to grow any more than that, I don't think. And on a final note, I will mention, since we can clearly see it now, I've had people ask me before about this suspended plant and this suspended piece of woodwork. If you see that green bar across the front there, that is the metal rim of a little 4-inch aquarium net, and I just cut the net off of it, bent it to a 90-degree angle so that the handle comes up the back of the tank. Now, so you can get a better look at what I mean about the twisted handle. And then I just bent the handle part into a loop that goes over the back of the tank. So that's all that is. That's a little aquarium dip net that has the net part cut out. And then I just, took the net part and bent it so it's sort of an open square. And then I've got that piece of wood sitting on top of it. I do have it tied to it with braided fishing line, but it has been so many years since I put it in there, I don't know if it's still there or not. I assume it is. Braided fishing line is made out of polyethylene, so it's the same kind of plastic my kayak is made out of. So it doesn't dissolve or break down the way cotton twine or something like that would. So I assume it's still tied to it with that braided fishing line. But that's all that is. It's nothing particularly expensive or clever. So moving on to my 55-gallon gourami tank. Not a lot new to talk about in this tank, but I will go over it fairly quickly. I've added these very large Siamese algae eaters. I've got 2 of them in here now. You can see the one on the rock over there, and the other one is lying on this leaf right at the moment. This one down here has strangely yellow fins. Several people have pointed that out. I've noticed it myself. Not really sure what's going on with that. I've never seen a Siamese algae eater with the yellow fins before. They all are clear. So possibly I bought it under the name of algae eating shark. They were both called algae eating sharks. And when I asked about whether it was actually a Siamese algae eater or not, I was told, yeah, sure, why not? Algae eating shark, Siamese algae eater, sure, that's what it is. So, I don't know. I've looked them up. I've done some research on them. I've looked at the Siamese algae eaters before. In fact, I have them in other tanks. And I'm sure these are Siamese algae eaters. I've just never seen those yellow fins. And that's the only one that has it. This one here, if you can see, the fins are very much clear. You just see right through them. You barely even notice they're there. So that's the only real new additions to this tank. But as you can see, they're doing their job. I did treat the tank and I did clean it out a little bit, but it was really still gross and grungy. And if you'll notice my swordtails right here, if you see them pecking off of the leaves of the Anubias there, they're doing their job too. They're eating algae like live bearers do. They just don't eat that certain kinds of algae. And what I found is the conjunction between the Siamese algae eaters and other algae-eating type fish is a recipe for keeping your tank really clean. The Siamese algae eaters seem to eat away the undesirable stuff that the other fish don't, attack. And once they've kind of scraped the surface clean, the other fish come in and make short work of everything else that's in there. So I'm really happy with the way this tank's shaping up cleanliness-wise. You can see my temple plant that I added in there recently is growing like crazy. So we're probably going to have to get in there and cut that back pretty soon, make it sort of fork and bush out at the bottom. We'll make it into a denser, bushier plant down there in the water rather than growing up and out. So all in all, I'm excited about the direction of the gourami tank. Now we need to figure out what we're going to do stocking wise, because it really is still lacking in the gourami department, considering it's my gourami tank. I did take the snakeskin that was in here out and moved it over into my 125, if you were not aware of that. So we're now just down to my one honey gourami, and I don't even see her. She's usually hiding up in the corner, or she's hiding in the bushes somewhere. She's not doing too well. In there by herself. The male died a while ago, and I just have not gotten around to getting any more honey gouramis in there with her. I've not been able to find any more since then. So we'll see. The gourami tank will undergo some changes at some point, but not too terribly soon. T-bar tank. Just did a big water change. Vacked out a bunch of Pleco Poop, and that was yesterday afternoon. It hasn't even been 24 hours yet, and you can already see all the Pleco Poop that's already starting to build up on the bottom. So as cool as they are, and I really do like the Plecos, they're really neat fish, and you can see its little nose sticking out there. That's its spot that it likes to hide in. They're messy. They put a big bioload in your tank. They do help keep it clean in one sense, but boy, they make it messy in another sense. I mean, when you think about it, if they're removing the algae from here, it's just ending up down there. They're just converting it into fish poop and putting it in a different place in the tank. But they really, if they're removing that much algae from the surface, that's good. It's keeping the tank looking pretty clean. It's just the other end of the digestive tract that causes me problems. As you can see, my aquarium thermometer is set for 25, but the tank is currently running 27 degrees, which is roughly 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And I've got all my tanks down here set to 80 degrees or thereabouts. The whole room is about 80 degrees. I'm actually sweating just being down here. So no worries on tank temperatures down there. I did want to mention that on my 29 miscellaneous there. That Bolivian ram in there also is sitting at 80 degrees, and the one in my office upstairs was a much lower temperature. So I think that might have something to do with it too. Getting on to my 40 breeder, formerly my Black Ghost Knifefish tank. I am just tickled pink with how this tank has turned out. And it is largely because of the group of Siamese algae eaters that I've put in here. These are much smaller. They've got a long way to go growing in, but you can see that rubber lip pleco in the background doing its thing. They had all but stopped cleaning the surface of everything because it had that grungy growth on it that the ChemiClean clears away. It's just that undesirable biofilm. And I also had hair algae, filamentous algae, in this tank. And the ChemiClean cleared up the gunk, but the filamentous algae was still all over everything, and the tank never really got clean even after I treated it. And I put these Siamese algae eaters in here, and within days you could see the algae was disappearing. And as soon as the algae was gone, that undesirable algae, the hair algae, then the rubber lip plecos and live bears that are in this tank just went to town and cleaned up all the other stuff. And now my woodwork is all scraped clean. You can actually see the wood grain and texture. All the various colors in the rocks are exposed again. I'm just so happy with the way this tank looks. And it's a combination of the ChemiClean, but the real, the important part of that combination is the ChemiClean in conjunction with putting those Siamese algae eaters in the tank. I gotta say, they might be my new favorite fish. They're almost like a must-have fish if you want them in your aquarium. I always thought the rubber lips did a good job of keeping an aquarium clean, but these true Siamese algae eaters, not the Chinese algae eaters and not the flying foxes, but the true Siamese algae eaters are amazing at eating algae. So they're well named. All right, moving on to my 125 gallon native tank. You can see my spotted tilapia is out and about, hanging out with the crowd. Of course, within a few moments of us talking, it'll be down there in the right-hand corner, hanging out where it always does. Shot a video about this tank. I've shot a couple of videos about this tank recently. I'm definitely to a point where I'm ready to do something different. I haven't entirely 100% decided what it's going to be. In fact, right before I started shooting this video, I was in the other room thinking about this tank, and I had more visions of like an, ooh, you know, I had one of those moments where like, ooh, that's a good idea, I could do that. And it would still involve native fish, but it would really be a very different vibe going on in this tank. But I think everybody would like it if I did it that way, and I would enjoy it. So that's going to be something I'm going to consider and I'm going to think about. I'm not going to give anything away on that one yet. I've already been throwing ideas out there. I'm trying to stress to people I'm just thinking out loud. The only real decision I've made is that I've decided I want to do something a little differently. I'm just kind of tired of this. It's just getting, I'm not going to go out, so far as to say it's getting boring necessarily, but it's the same thing all the time. And I just want to see something new and something different. I just like mixing things up and changing them around when I can. I will say my little, see it lying on the bottom down there, that white sucker fish, that I believe is the sucker fish that jumped out of my other tank and was injured. It does come out and feed when food goes in the tank, but it really lays low and it just stays on the bottom in the back corner. It's actually usually lying like sort of right in this little groove right there, and that's kind of like its hiding spot between the glass and a rock. And I guess it feels safe and secure down there. So I'm not sure if it really still is injured or if it's just skittish and it doesn't like hanging out with everybody else. But I've got other suckerfish in this tank that usually group together, and that one does not group with the other suckerfish. And that right there is my Chinese algae eater on the bottom. That is actually still in this tank. So that's something that I'm going to have to think about getting out of this tank at some point when I mix it up and change it up. The only fish I think that might stay is possibly my big shiner back there with the orange fins. I really like that one. I know it's a schooling fish, but it ain't going to hurt it to be in there as the only shiner. And then possibly my gold spot Pleco. I believe the last time I talked about it, I called it a gold nugget Pleco, which is a very different Pleco. I would love to have a gold nugget Pleco, but the one I have, I believe, is the gold spot Pleco, sold by PetSmart under the name High Fin Spotted Pleco. And they don't get huge. I really do think that I could keep it in this tank for the duration of its life, but I don't know. I'm on the fence about that one. The spotted tilapia is sort of a sentimental fish for me. I was given it by one of my viewers sort of mistakenly. I didn't know what it was when I got it, but there it is, and I've had it for years now. So I don't know if I'd feel right taking that down to the fish store and just getting rid of it. But it's also probably not going to go right in the tank. However, I'm going to change it up. I just don't think I've got room for a fish that size in here. So we'll see what happens. I don't know. Again, just thinking out loud, I didn't really want to go down that road when we started looking at this tank. Now we get a better look at my Chinese algae eater. So when you go to the PetSmart or the local fish store and they tell you one of those little $2 Chinese algae eaters will keep your 10-gallon tank clean, that's what that's going to turn into. And it's going to turn into that very quickly. So do not buy those fish if you don't have a very large tank to keep them in or a place to put them within the first year of getting them. They will outgrow a 10 or a 20-gallon tank in no time flat. They get big. So the only reason I said that, I was at the fish store today and I saw them in there and I saw people looking at them for their small tank and I had to say something to them. So that's just kind of on my mind. My purple spotted gudgeon tank is the next one we're going to look at. Not much to talk about in here either. I have been seeing some brief appearances by my South American catfish, and it lives down in that little cave right there. You can actually see my gudgeon is sitting right there. And then in this cave right here is where my rubber lip pleco lives, and it's probably on the rock, up on the top side of the rock there, or possibly in there on the rock or something. But that's it. That's the caves where these fish live. My snail population in this tank is getting a little bit out of control. I do come in here and pick some of the larger ones out, and they go to Butterbean for dinner or go in some of my tanks that have loaches in them. Loaches love snails. That's a nice treat to give them. The plants in here are doing well. This plant here is one I got from a viewer. Don't know what it is, but it's doing really well and I like it. That's just a temple plant. That's mine that's been in there forever. But in the back you'll notice there's sort of a lacy looking plant. That's another one I got from a viewer that I do not know what it's called, but it's doing really well and it looks really good. So I'm going to need to keep the water sprite sort of thinned out on the top. It tends to grow in very quickly, and apparently I've now got duckweed in this tank too. Ugh. So yeah, love duckweed. So apparently I'm going to need to get in there and start cleaning the duckweed out, because that will create just basically it'll just blanket the surface in no time at all. It'll block the light, although I've got a lot of light in this tank and it could stand with having some of the light blocked. But it'll also cover the surface, and that blocks gas exchange. So you don't want to have, you know, the whole entire surface covered with duckweed like that, unless you've got an air stone or some other way to ensure that you're getting good gas exchange. That duckweed will just absolutely cover your surface and really interfere with the gas exchange, especially at night. I know a lot of people are probably thinking that you know, plants will put oxygen in the water, and that's true, but they take oxygen out of the water when they're not photosynthesizing at night, and so they can be just as bad at night as they are good during the day. And furthermore, if you've got a plant that's actually exposed above the water, like duckweeds floating on the surface, the oxygen and CO2 that it's exchanging are not really coming from or going into the water. That's actually happening much more easily through the atmospheric exposure on its top side. So duckweed is not really contributing a lot to your tank as far as oxygenating it during the day. And then, of course, at night, all plants that you've got in your tank are basically taking oxygen out of the water. So don't necessarily believe that myth that having plants in your tank just magically oxygenates it all the time, because it doesn't. And then, of course, having plants crossing your surface and covering your surface can be bad news all the way around. So moving on to my 125 gallon tank. This is the last one that's really in need of any kind of serious maintenance. Need to get around my waterfall tank here for a minute. We can stand over here, see it from a broader angle. So nothing really to talk about in this one either. I did put my snakeskin gourami in this tank recently, as I mentioned earlier. So there it is. It's pretty much doing what I expected it to do. I've had a snakeskin gourami in this tank before, so I wasn't expecting there to be any issues or problems with anybody. The worst that I can see happening is that all my beautiful, lovely roots back here from my water sprite are going to start getting chewed up and damaged from the gourami. That's a possibility. Gouramis are plant eaters. They love to munch on soft, tender plants, and all those little rootlets and all those little fine root shoots coming out on the end are probably delicious for the gouramis. So really surprised we're not seeing damage already. So that's something I need to do, is thin out the water sprite when I'm in there. Don't forget, of course, I will put my email down below. I do sell the water sprite, the Java fern. I've got a lot of Java Windelov for sale right now. Just hit me up in the email and we can talk. You'll get a lot of plants for your money. I can promise you that much. So the water sprite needs to come out and get thinned. Simple water change, of course. I'm way overdue on a filter change on this tank. I don't even remember the last time I did a filter change. And then, of course, I need to wipe the glass down. But otherwise, not a lot going on. I will say my lotus in here, red tiger lotus, spotted lotus, marble lotus, whatever that thing's called, is doing well. I cut it back quite a bit recently. It had a lot of long, leggy leaves heading up towards the surface, and I removed all of those, and it actually looks like we've got one that has made it up to the surface, or thereabouts. It's not quite on the surface yet, but it's pretty close. Beautiful plant, love it. So I'll get in there and trim that one back too. but you can see the rest of it is doing really well. And then where I got in there and thinned out some of that Java fern and Anubias in there, that's all bouncing back and looking good. Well, as much as you can tell through all the grunge on the glass. So moving on to my 20-gallon Angelfish tank. Get to see a little bit of action from one of my larger snails. So this tank, if you'll notice, has an air stone roaring away back there. That is because we are now treating this tank with ChemiClean for the first time. I've never treated this tank with ChemiClean that I can remember. Maybe I have at some point, but I don't remember ever doing it. And you see all that reddish brown growth? That's the grunge that the ChemiClean will get rid of. And then once that's gone, the rubber lip that's in this tank, or it might be a clown pleco, I don't know, I can't remember. I think it is a clown pleco, is in the bottom. It lives under those rocks down there. And you can see how clean the wood is, and you can see how clean the rocks are. They've all been scraped clean. And that cleanliness gets maintained, partially by the fish, and partially by these snails. You can see another one right there that is alive. And you can see some of the new growth in here gets kept clean. But the stuff that's already covered in that grunge, they don't eat that because it's covered in that grunge. You can see that piece right there on the tip is almost ready to just peel off and float away. And with this treatment going on in this tank right now with the ChemiClean, that will peel off and go away. It'll just break loose and drift into the water column. And so this tank's going to need some more maintenance pretty soon, but it'll get rid of a lot of that nasty looking stuff in there. And then the fish that are in this tank that are sort of geared towards keeping it clean will help keep it that way. And if I haven't shown anybody yet, I did add a whiptail catfish to this tank a while ago. I've just not really mentioned it. I was kind of waiting to see whether it survived the first couple of weeks it's been in there. But it's been, I don't know, maybe 10 days now, and it's still looking good. So I'm not going to worry too much about it. My only concern would be that that cherry barb back there might be a bit of a fin nipper. And with the long fins that you'll see on the whiptail, where it gets its name, that might be a problem. So we might have to see how that works out. And then, of course, I've also got these new diamond tetras in there, which are awesome. I'm really enjoying these diamond tetras. They look great. So this tank just got a water change, got a filter change, wiped down the glass, and then we added the ChemiClean treatment and the air stone. So that is going to do its thing, and we'll get to that in a few days and see how it all looks. My quarantine tank, not really anything to talk about in here. If you didn't know, I do have 7 Australian rainbow fish. They're probably the lowest budget and most mundane of the rainbow fish. They're still rainbow fish and they're still pretty, but by rainbow fish standards, they're kind of toned down. And again, they're not very expensive. They don't get very big, but they will go perfectly in my 40 breeder, which again, my former Black Ghost Knifefish tank. They'll add just a little bit of color. They'll keep with the earth tone themes that I've got going on in that tank. And they're a nice little schooling fish that'll fill in some space and add a splash of color without getting too big. So these are about ready to come out of quarantine now. They are still pretty small, but there's nothing in that tank that would eat them. So there's no reason they can't go in that tank at this size. So they're about ready to come out of quarantine and go over into their new forever tank. Last but not least, I don't know, maybe we'll talk about my waterfall tank real quick tonight. This is my 40 breeder Brackish tank, and in it I've got my my figure 8 puffer, butterbean. I've got 2 orange sailfin mollies, and then I've got a bunch of these little bumblebee gobies. You can see one right there hanging out on the Java fern. So I was thinking about this tank earlier, and I was thinking about butterbean, and you can see those sort of white lesions he has on his forehead and around his back. My regular viewers will know that I've been dealing with that for a long time, and if you look at some of my older videos of him, you'll see that that stuff is really starting to clear up quite a bit. He's looking a lot better. The plants also look a lot better too, and I expected that to happen. What I've done is, over the last couple of water changes, I haven't bothered to put brackish water back in the tank. I've refilled it with fresh water. Now, I didn't do that because you've got to adjust it slowly. You can adjust it, in one water change. The nature of these fish allow them to adapt to changing situations very quickly, changing salinity very quickly. I did it that way just because it was easy. You know, I did a water change and just didn't bother to put brackish water back in. I just put fresh water back in. I did that twice, and I've now got the salinity down below what would technically be considered brackish water. So technically, I guess right now this is not a brackish aquarium, but the water is mineralized. I've got very, very soft water right out of the ground, and then it goes through a series of treatments, which, long story short, I've got very, very soft water, like very soft water. It's got zero, nothing, anything in it except a little bit of sodium. So this has marine salts in it, just not enough to push it all the way up to 1.004, which is the bottom end of where brackish begins. I'm at about 1.002 at this point. And it seems to be working. It seems to be making him feel better, or her, whichever it is. And it also seems to be helping my plants grow. I had it up at 1.008 for several years. The plants were really stunted, as I expected. But for the sake of Butterbean, you know, I thought that it needed that my salinity needed to stay that high. Maybe the occasional lower, you know, and then bring it back up or something. But I thought they really needed to stay in that higher salinity of that sort of medium low end brackish. But I'm now beginning to think that maybe even very, very low end brackish, or even just kind of hard water, might be better for them than that higher end brackish. I don't know. I know in the wild the figure 8 puffers don't actually live in brackish water. They move in and out of brackish water quite frequently, but the habitat that they live in is freshwater. It's very hard freshwater, but it is fresh water that they live in. It's just generally recommended that once you bring them home and put them in an aquarium, you should keep them in brackish water from that point on. I don't know why it's always been said, but that is the general consensus, that they do better in an aquarium in brackish water, despite the fact that they live in freshwater in the wild. So I'm now sort of pushing that middle ground between freshwater and brackish water. Again, I'm at 1.002 on my specific gravity scale, and that puts me below officially, technically being able to call this brackish water. But it is still mineralized. It does still have sea salt in it. I love the way my mollies sleep lying on the rocks. And I did want to make one other point unrelated to the fish or anything in this tank. If you will look at this frond right there, that is a broken off piece of my water sprite. When I sell this to people, it usually comes kind of beat up. I stuff it in little Ziploc baggies and then just, you know, I cram it into the shipping box. I try to send you as much as I possibly can. And as a result, a lot of the fronds will get broken. And of course, it just, you know, it lives in a bucket in the other room most of the time. So it shows up looking pretty rough. But even if you take one of these broken fronds that's not even attached to the root ball anymore and you just throw it in your tank, look at what happens. Can you see those little white lines hanging down off of it? We've got right here, if I can get my finger in the screen somewhere, there we are. Right there, right here. All these are little babies that are already beginning to develop. So even if you take a broken frond and throw it in your aquarium with some light on it, it will start generating new growth, and you'll start getting new plants developing off of that. So, you know, again, if you get it from me and you wind up getting some broken fronds in there, don't throw them away. Keep them. Throw them in the water. Throw them in a bucket with some light on it. Throw them in your tank, whatever you're going to do with them. And that will start generating new growth, and you'll just get a ton of that water sprite growing off of those broken fronds. So that brings us all the way back to my 29 miscellaneous where we started, and I think we're going to end it right there. We'll talk about the waterfall tank in another video. We'll keep that separate because we're already about a half an hour into this one, and I know I can probably go another 15 minutes once we start talking about the waterfall tank. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure you're subscribed. Don't forget to check out my email down below if you are interested in any of those plants I talked about. Occasionally I do have a temple plant cutting or possibly a piece of Anubias. I can do outside yard plants, hostas, all kinds of stuff. So if you're interested in buying plants, check my email down below. Hit me up. We'll talk. Make sure you're subscribed. Thanks for watching. Don't forget this one is my 29 miscellaneous. And I'll see you real soon in the next one.